Chicago, October night. A ballroom full of people who think they already know how this story ends. Don't. A woman in a red dress is laughing, loud enough for the whole room to hear. She's pointing at a man standing near the window, alone. No date, no flash. Just a plain steel watch and a charcoal suit, and the kind of stillness that makes people uncomfortable when they can't explain it. She calls him Nobi. The room laughs with her. What the room doesn't know, what she doesn't know, is that 2 days ago that man signed a $412 million contract with the city of Chicago. What nobody in that ballroom knows yet is that the man standing next to her has been stealing from him. And the woman walking through those doors right now. She's about to change everything. Darius Cole did not celebrate alone. That was the first thing anyone who knew him would tell you. Not because he was modest, not because he was humble and though people perform humility at award dinners, but because celebrating alone meant the moment was about you. And Darius had spent 20 years learning that the earthquakes were never just about you. So when the text came through on Thursday morning, his attorney, 7 words, no punctuation, the way the lawyers text when they've been up since 5, he read it once. Set the phone face down in the cup holder, looked out at Lake Michigan through the windshield. Gray sky, water the color of old pewter, a cargo ship somewhere outside the horizon, too small to see clearly, too steady to ignore. He picked up his coffee, cold. He drank it anyway. The contract was done, $412 million. City of Chicago, infrastructure and drainage overhaul for 6 neighborhoods on the south and west sides. 18 months of proposals, revisions, site assessments, late nights in conference rooms that smelled like dry erase markers and burnt coffee. 18 months of his team rang numbers while other firms ran their mouths. And now it was done. He pulled back onto Lakeshore Drive, both hands on the wheel, radio off. Just the sound of tires on wet asphalt and the heat coming through the vents and the quiet of a man who has stopped needing the noise. He thought about his father, couldn't help it. His father had spent 30 years wiring houses on the west side. Came home every evening with chalk dust on his forearms and grease under his fingernails and called it a good day. Never once complained. Never once explained. Showed up, did the work, came home. Darius had been 17 when he first picked up a framing nail gun on a job site in Bridgeport. His father's friend had gotten him the spot. $3 above minimum wage, 94 degrees in July. He'd gone home that first evening so tired his hands were still shaking at dinner. His father had looked at him across the table and said, "That's the Ian." He hadn't understood then. He did now. The office was on the 14th floor of a building in the South Loop. Clean lines. Nothing flashy. The kind of space that said we do serious work here without needing to announce it. His assistant, Petra, was already at her desk when he came through the door at 8:40. She had a stack of contract addenda waiting and a look on her face that meant the morning was already running sideways somewhere. He stopped at her desk. She held up the envelope before he could ask. "Not mail," she said. "Someone dropped it at the front desk downstairs this morning. Before 7, the overnight guy didn't get a name." Darius took it. Plain white envelope, his name on the front in ballpoint pen. Block letters, not cursive. No return address. No stamp. He opened it at his desk with the door closed. Inside, a single card. Cream-colored paper, pink blank border. The kind of thing hotel business center prints for 50 cents. Southside class reunion. 20-year anniversary. Chicago Marriott downtown Magnificent Mile. Saturday, 7 p.m. and below that, handwritten in the same block letters from the envelope. Time to close the door properly. He read it twice, sat on the desk, leaned back in his chair. No signature, no explanation. He should have thrown it away. He put it in his jacket pocket instead. The rest of Thursday passed the way good Thursdays do when a man has real work in front of him. Calls with city liaisons. A walkthrough at the Morgan Park site with his project lead. A late lunch at his desk that got cold before he remembered to eat it. He did not think about the envelope, or he tried not to. But the handwriting stayed with him. Block letters. Deliberate. Someone who didn't want to be identified but wanted to be understood. Those are 2 different things. Most people don't know the difference. He knew 4 people from that class who still reached out. Raina Holloway, who had become a compliance auditor for the city's vendor verification office and sent him a holiday card every December with a handwritten note inside. 2 guys from the basketball team who texted him on his birthday. and Faye Odom, who had been his closest friend since 10th grade, and who currently ran a consulting practice out of a converted loft in Pilsen, and who had been telling him for the past 3 years to go to this reunion. He called Faye on the drive home. She picked up before the second ring. "You're going," she said, "not a question. How do you know about the envelope?" Long pause. Not guilty. Just the kind of pause that means someone is deciding how much to say. "I know you've spent 8 years building your life back up in silence," she said finally. "I just wanted to make sure the door was unlocked." He didn't answer right away. Watched the lights on Michigan Avenue slides past in the rain. "Faye, Darius. That's not an answer." "No," she said, "it's not." He exhaled. "You could have just asked me to go." "I did, 3 times. You said maybe all 3 times." He almost smiled. "Almost," Saturday said. "Saturday," she said. He hung up. The phone picked up against the windshield. He turned on the wipers and thought about a door he hadn't opened in 8 years and whether closing it properly was different from just walking away from it for good. He still didn't know, but he was going to find out. There are things about a marriage that nobody warns you about. Not the hard parts. Everyone warns you about the hard parts. They warn you about money and about distance and about the way 2 people can share a bed for years and still manage to be completely alone inside it. What nobody warns you about is the slow erosion. The way a person can make you feel small so gradually that you don't notice until one day you're standing in a parking garage at 11 at night, wondering when exactly you stopped believing you were worth much of anything. Darius had grown up in a house on 79th Street, 2-story brick, his grandmother's hydrangeas in the front yard every summer. His mother worked nights at a hospital on the near south side. His father worked days. They passed each other at the front door most mornings, his mother coming in as his father went out. And somehow they had built something solid out of that schedule that most couples couldn't build with all day and all night together. He understood later that what they had built was respect. Not the kind people talk about at dinner parties, the quiet kind. The kind that means I see you and I trust you and I will not diminish you. He had wanted that. He had wanted exactly that. He met Simone in the spring of their senior year. She was in his English class, sat 2 rows over. She had the vox changed every 8 weeks and had a laugh that could carry across a gymnasium and a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the most interesting thing in the room. He fell for her the way young men fall. Fast, completely. Without considering the landing, they were good for a while. Better than good. She was sharp and driven, and she made him want to be more deliberate about his own ambitions. He worked job sites during the day and studied for his contractor's license at night. She enrolled in a certification program she'd had her eye on for 2 years. They rented a small apartment in Bridgeport. Nothing fancy. 2 windows facing an alley and a radiator that clanked every night at 2 in the morning like it was filing a complaint. But they were building something. He believed that. The first sign that something was shifting came the year the money got tight. Darius had taken on a bigger project than he was ready for. A warehouse renovation in Pilsen, and the general contractor had slow-walked 3 payments. For 4 months, Darius covered their expenses out of savings he hadn't told Simone about because he hadn't wanted her to worry. By the 5th month, the savings were gone. Simone noticed. She didn't ask directly. She made comments. Small ones, the kind that have a different word on the surface and a different meaning underneath. "You know, Jerome just bought his wife a new car," she said one evening. Jerome was a man they had gone to high school with who now sold insurance and drove a leased Cadillac. "Good for Jerome," Darius said. She didn't respond, just turned back to the television. He told himself it was stress. He told himself she was allowed to have bad days. He heeds himself all the things a man tells himself when he is not yet ready to see what he's actually looking at. The second sign came a year later. Simone wanted to take a second certification course, Advanced Project Management. The enrollment fee was $1,400. They didn't have $1,400 sitting around, not that month, not cleanly. He didn't tell her that. He found a buyer for his grandfather's tool set, steel framing tools. The kind they stopped making the right way sometime in the 80s. He had kept them wrapped in oilcloth in the back of the closet since his grandfather passed. They were not just tools. They were the first thing that had ever made him feel like he came from something. He sold them for $800. He made up the difference with a credit card and told Simone the money had come through from a supplier who owed him. She enrolled in the course. She didn't say thank you, not because she was ungrateful. He believed that then. He wanted to believe that then. She just didn't know what it had cost. And he never told her. That was the year he started the notebook. Small black thing. The kind you get at a drugstore for $2. He didn't start it as a record of grievances. He started it because he was trying to understand something. He would write down things she said, specific words, specific dates, and try to read them back later with distance and see if he was misreading her. If maybe he was being too sensitive. If maybe the problem was him. The problem he would come to understand was not him. But that understanding took time. The third sign came on a Wednesday night in November. He had driven downtown to pick her up from a networking event. His truck heater was broken. Rain coming down so hard it bounced off the pavement in sheets. He parked across the street and waited for 40 minutes with the windows fogging up and his jacket not nearly thick enough for how cold it was. When she finally came out and saw him standing by the truck, soaked through, she looked at him the way you look at something that has inconvenienced you. "Why do you look like that?" she said. He said, "I came to pick you up." She said, "I told you I'd get a ride." She hadn't. He had the text right there, but he didn't show it to her. He just opened the passenger door and drove home in the wet and the cold and the silence and told himself it was one night. It was just one night. But one night has a way of becoming the shape of a marriage, if you let it. He let it. For 3 more years, he let it. The discovery did not come through a confrontation. It did not come through a fight or a tear-stained confession or an anonymous phone call. It came through a pocket. He was doing laundry on a Saturday morning. Just their clothes, nothing dramatic. He went through the pockets of her blazer before putting it in the machine, the way he always did, because she always forgot things in pockets. And his hand came out with a folded piece of paper. Hotel receipt. Dated 11 days earlier, Chicago, not out of town. The name on the reservation was not hers, Corvin Bale. He didn't know that name yet, wouldn't know the face for another few weeks. He stood in the laundry room with the receipt in his hand, and the washing machine making its preliminary sounds around him, and he read it 3 times. Slowly, the way you read something when you are hoping the words will change if you go slow enough. They didn't change. He folded it back exactly as he'd found it. Placed it in the pocket of his own jeans, finished the laundry, made breakfast, sat down across from Simone at the kitchen table and asked if she wanted eggs. She said yes without looking up from her phone. He made eggs. That night he opened the black notebook, wrote the date, the hotel name, the reservation name, closed the notebook, put it in the bottom drawer of his desk and went to bed. He did not confront her. Not that day. Not the next week. Not the month after. People asked him later, years later, why he stayed. Why he didn't say anything. He had thought about that question long enough to have a real answer. Because I kept thinking if I worked hard enough, he would say. If I was patient enough, if I proved myself in every way that mattered, she'd eventually see what she had. He paused when he said that. He always paused there. I was wrong about what love is supposed to cost a man, he would add. I thought suffering quietly was the same as loving deeply. I know better now. The divorce came 14 months after the laundry room. Simone brought it up over dinner in the way people bring up things they have been rehearsing for weeks. She said she needed more than he was giving her. She said she needed someone at a different level. She said she had been unhappy for a long time and she thought they both knew it. She was right about one of those things. He signed the papers without asking for anything. Not the apartment. Not the money she had borrowed from him to cover her sister's reception venue 3 years earlier. Not even an explanation. He walked out of the courthouse on a gray Tuesday morning and sat in his truck for exactly 12 minutes. Then he called Faye. "I need to start over," he said. "Really start over." She said, "Come to my office tomorrow, 9 o'clock. He said, "I'll be there at 8:45. She said, "That's why I called you, not the other way around." Cole Infrastructure started with 2 employees and a lease on a small office in Bronzeville. The first contract was a drainage repair job for a community organization on the west side. Not glamorous, not profitable by the numbers. But the work was real and it needed doing and nobody else had shown up to do it right. Darius showed up. He always showed up. Over 5 years he built the company the way he built everything else. Quietly, deliberately, one honest job at a time. He hired people who knew their craft, He paid them what they were worth. He did not cut corners, not because it was good business, though it was, but because corners existed for reasons, and the reasons were usually structural, and structural failures cost people their lives. He had never lost a worker on a site. He intended to keep it that way. The year Cole Infrastructure hit 40 employees, he funded the scholarship program at their old high school. Full endowment, enough to cover tuition costs for 4 students every year indefinitely. He did it through a legal trust with no public-facing name attached. His attorney had suggested a naming opportunity. A plaque, maybe. Something for the alumni newsletter. Darius had looked at him for a long moment. No, he said. Just no, just no. He never told anyone. Not Faye. Not anyone on his team. Nadine. He had not done it to be remembered. He had done it because his grandmother used to say that community is only as strong as what its strongest members as quietly pour back into it. She had said it in the context of church fundraisers and neighborhood block associations. He had applied it to a scholarship fund. She would have approved. He met Nadine Xavier on a Thursday evening in October, 3.5 years before the reunion. There was a community fundraiser in Bronzeville. Education initiative. He had donated money and shown up in person because that was what he did when he donated money. Showed up to see the work in person, not to be seen. The event wound down around 9. Volunteers started stacking chairs and pulling some tablecloths. Most of the attendees had already gone. A few organizers were hovering near the exit with the polite exhaustion of people who had been running something for 6 hours. Darius was stacking chairs near the back. He didn't know anyone was watching him. Then a voice a few feet to his left. Most men leave when the cameras go off. He didn't stop stacking. He glanced over. She was standing in a bodycon emerald green dress, short-fitted, the kind that looked effortless and wasn't. Silk press, hair straight and smooth past her shoulders. She had a stack of programs in one arm and was looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. Not flirtatious, not critical. Just paying attention. He said, "The chairs don't stack themselves." She looked at the chair in his hand, then back at him. "I'm Nadine Xavier," she said. "I run the education fund for the South and West Sides." "Darius Cole," he said. "I build things." She smiled at that. Small, real. They talked for 2 hours about the school system, about what the funding gaps actually looked like on the ground, not in the grant applications. About what it meant to build something in a community you came from, as opposed to one you had been assigned to fix. Neither of them mentioned money. Neither of them mentioned titles or companies or the size of anything. He told her about the warehouse job in Bridgeport, the first one, the one that nearly broke him financially and had taught him more about structural reinforcement than any certification course. She told him about a 3rd-grade teacher in Lawndale who had 11 different reading levels in one classroom and exactly no support, and who had called her personally last February to ask if the fund could provide 32 dictionaries. "Did you?" he asked. 40, she said. 1 for each kid and 8 spares. He nodded. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I'll believe that you're not most men when I see it proven over time." "Not over one conversation," he said. "That's fair. It took 2 years. 2 years of unremarkable Tuesdays, of showing up when he said he would, of not requiring anything in return for the showing up, of being exactly who he was in the big moments and exactly who he was in the small ones. When he proposed, he did it at the kitchen table of her apartment on a Sunday morning. No restaurant, no crowd. Ring box pulled out at the dramatic moment. Just coffee and the Sunday paper and a question he had been certain of for over a year. And it had waited to ask until he was equally certain she had seen enough of him to answer it honestly. She said yes before he finished the sentence. He had been in the truck on Lakeshore Drive for 11 minutes when Faye had called to push him toward that reunion. Now it was Saturday night. Now he was in the elevator of the Chicago Marriott, downtown Magnificent Mile, watching his own reflection in the polished doors. Charcoal suit, white shirt, no tie. The steel watch his father had left him, plain and worn at the edges on his left wrist. Nadine had a board meeting running late. She would come as soon as it wrapped. She had told him, "Go in. Don't wait in the lobby for me like a man who needs backup." He had said, "I'm not going in there for backup. I'm going in there to close a door." She had looked at him and said, "Good, that's exactly why you should go." He straightened his jacket in the elevator mirror. Took a slow breath. The doors opened. The bolt The room was full and warm and loud with the specific noise of people who haven't seen each other in 20 years and are performing the best version of who they've become. A jazz trio near the far wall, gold light from chandeliers, the smell of something expensive passing on a tray. Darius stepped inside and took the room in without moving through it yet. He saw Raina Holloway near the bar, arms folded, watching the room the way a compliance auditor watches a room, cataloging, not participating. He saw 3 guys from the basketball team near the buffet table. He saw Simone. She was standing in the center of a cluster of classmates, red dress, box braids half pinned up, champagne flute in her hand, laughing at something she had just said. She looked good. She had always looked good. That had never been the question. Beside her, a man Darius didn't recognize, tall, groomed, a suit that had cost more than it fit him. The man was not looking at the people around them. He was looking across the room, at Darius, more specifically, at Darius's watch. Not the way a man looks at a watch he admires. The way a man looks at a number he is trying to calculate. Quick, deliberate, gone as fast as it came. Simone noticed Darius at the same moment. Her smile did not change. It just redirected. "Look who decided to show up," she said loud enough to reach the people around her. Still wearing that same tired face. Her friends shifted slightly, the class adjusting its geometry, orienting toward the entertainment. It walked toward them at a normal pace. No rush, no performance. 8 years since the divorce, Simone said, and the man still walks in here alone. She paused, looking around the room. No ring, no date. Some things just don't change, I guess. He stopped a few feet from her. "Calm, still actually," he said. "I'm married." The cluster went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then Simone laughed. The kind of laugh that is designed to convince a room before it convinced the person doing the laughing. "Married." She looked at the people around her. "Y'all hear that? Darius says he's married." She turned back to him. "To a who exactly? Where is this woman?" "She's finishing up a meeting," he said. "She'll be here."
Sure she will.
Simone tilted her head. A whole imaginary wife. "That's almost sad, Darius. Almost." The man in the too expensive suit had still not introduced himself, had not said a word. He was standing just behind Simone's right shoulder, with his eyes on Darius's wrist, and the expression of a man running an equation he hadn't expected to find this difficult. Darius looked at him once, directly. The man looked away first. Darius turned back to Simone. His voice stayed even, unhurried. The voice of a man who has learned that silence, deployed at the right moment, is louder than anything you could actually say. "You should probably slow down," he said quietly. She blinked at him. "You're about to say something you can't take back." She stared at him for 2 full seconds. Something moved behind her eyes. Not understanding, not yet. Just the first faint recognition that the ground might not be as solid as she'd assumed when she walked in tonight. Then she straightened, raised her chin. Performed certainty back over the flicker. "Slow down?" She laughed again, thinner this time. "Darius, I have absolutely nothing to slow down for." He nodded once. "Okay," he said, and he walked toward the windows facing Michigan Avenue, leaving her standing clocked in her cluster. Not because he was retreating, because there was nothing left to say to her yet, and because he had just seen Raina push off the bar rail and start walking toward him with the careful, hurried stride of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. He turned toward the window and waited. Rain was coming down soft and steady on Michigan Avenue below. The streetlights scattered gold and red across the wet pavement. Somewhere down there, a cab pulled over. Let someone out. Kept moving. Chicago on a Saturday night. Just doing its thing, entirely unbothered by what was unfolding 3 floors up. Raina reached him. She didn't bother with small talk. "Corvin Bale," she said. He turned to look at her. "The man with Simone," she said. "That's his name. He's done this before. He tried to run a falsified subcontractor bid through one of your West Side projects 2 years back. Shell paperwork, fake vendor account. His team skimmed off the top before your people caught it." "I know," Darius said. Raina paused. "Then I thought you might." She looked at him steadily. "But here's what you don't know," she said. She let that land for a moment. The way someone does when they want to make sure you're actually listening and not just hearing. "He's doing it again." She kept her voice low. "With the 412 contract, the one you just signed 2 days ago, he didn't move, didn't change expression. Just held her gaze and let the information settle into the precise place where it needed to settle before he did anything with it. And then she said the part that was actually the knife. The person feeding him information about your bids, she said, about your team's internal numbers. That person works for you. In your office, right now. Darius stood very still. Outside the Mountain wet abind, a cab moving through it. Chicago, unbothered. He said, how long have you known? Long enough, she said. But I needed something solid before I said it out loud. He nodded. He looked back out at Michigan Avenue, down at the rain, down at the city that had taken everything he built and held it and let him keep building without asking permission and without promising anything in return. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He glanced at it. One text, Nadine, 2 words. Almost there. He put the phone back in his pocket. And then, from somewhere near the far doors at the other end of the ballroom, he heard the low sound of the entrance opening. Felt the shift in the air. The way a room changes when something it wasn't expecting walks in. He didn't have to look to know, but he looked anyway. She walked in like she had somewhere better to be and was choosing this instead. That was the only way to describe it. Not an entrance, not a performance. Just a woman moving through a room the way water moves through a space, finding the path without forcing it, without asking the room's permission, without needing it. Cole. Midnight blue dress, bodycon. Short enough that every step showed exactly how little she needed anyone's approval. Silk press, hair straight and smooth past her shoulders, catching the gold light from the chandeliers like it had been arranged that way on purpose. Nude heels, small clutch, nothing extra, nothing wasted. She did not look around the room first. She did not scan for familiar faces or check whether people were watching. She just walked toward Darius. And the room watched anyway. Couldn't help it. Someone near the bar said something low to her friend. Darius caught the tail end of it. Wasn't that Nadine Cole, the woman who opened 3 new community schools on the west side this year? Something like that. He didn't catch all of it because he was watching Simone's face. And Simone's face was worth watching. It happened in stages. First the turn. She heard the shift in the room and turned like everyone else turned, automatically the way you turn when a room collectively decides something important, just walked in. Then the recognition. Not of Nadine specifically, just of what Nadine represented. The category of woman that Simone had always told herself she was and had always, in her deepest and most honest moments, been afraid she wasn't. Then the color just left her face. Nadine, Darius, didn't slow down until she was right beside him. She pressed a kiss to his cheek, warm, unhurried, the kind of kiss that isn't for anyone watching, but lands in front of everyone anyway, and said, "Sorry I'm late, baby." That meeting ran long. Darius said, "You made it." She said, "I always make it." She said it to him, not the room. But the room heard it. The room was going to hear everything from this point forward, whether it meant to or not. Simone found her voice somewhere around then. It came out a half step higher than she intended, so she slid her throat. "You're Darius's wife." Nadine turned to look at her. No rush, no sharpness. Just a woman who had heard that tone before and was not moved by it in any direction. "Yes," Nadine said. "I am." And she said it the way you say a thing that is simply true. Not to wound, not to perform, just stating a fact that the room had apparently needed to hear. Simone tried to recover, tried to find footing she'd had 10 minutes ago when she'd been the one holding the room. She looked at Nadine the way women look at other women. When they are doing inventory, they don't want anyone to see them. Dress, hair, posture. The way Darius's hand had moved to the small of Nadine's back without him thinking about it. Automatic, easy, like breathing. Simone had seen that gesture before, on someone else's husband, at someone else's party, and she had thought then, briefly, that there was something unbearably intimate about a man whose hand knew where to go without being told. She had not thought about it again until right now. Simone said, "That's wonderful. I had no idea Darius had." She paused, rearranging, editing herself in real time. "Had someone like you." Nadine tilted her head slightly. Just slightly. "Most people don't take the time," she said, "to find out what someone actually has. Not cruel, not pointed. Just true in the way that very simple observations are true when the person making them isn't trying to be anything but honest." Simone's mouth opened, closed. The cluster of classmates around her had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people have already decided to remember this moment and are now simply collecting details. Corvin Bale had also gone quiet, which was interesting because he had not been particularly loud to begin with. He was a man who performed confidence through proximity rather than words. But the quality of his silence had changed. He was no longer measuring, he was recalculating, and he was not happy with what the new numbers were showing him. His eyes kept going back to Darius's watch. Darius noticed. He had been noticing for a while. There is a thing a certain kind of man does when he realizes he has been operating on bad information. He doesn't admit it immediately. He can't. Admitting it immediately would mean acknowledging that all the moves he made based on the bad information were also bad moves. And that's too much to absorb in a ballroom in front of witnesses. So instead he gets very still, very contained, and his eyes start doing the work his mouth has stopped doing, running the new numbers, looking for the exit that costs him the least. Corvin Bale was doing exactly that. Darius had seen it before. In contractors who'd underbid and realized it on day 3. In suppliers who'd promised materials on a timeline they couldn't actually hit. In anyone, ever, who had made an assumption they were only now discovering was wrong. The look was always the same. He turned to Simone, kept his voice even. What exactly do you do now, Darius? She had found her footing again, or was trying to. The question came out careful. Testing the ground the way you test ice in November. 1 foot, then pause, then maybe the other. Construction, he said. Infrastructure. We just closed a contract with the city. That's. She paused. She was listening to something inside her head that the rest of them couldn't hear. Running something herself. That's great. That's really great. She didn't sound like she thought it was great. She sounded like a woman who had just been handed a bill she wasn't expecting. Corvin moved then. Not toward Darius, not toward Simone. He took 2 steps to the side, angling himself slightly away from the cluster, and pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. His thumbs moved, quick, deliberate. The text was short. Darius could tell from the rhythm of it, 3 seconds at most, and then the phone went back in the pocket. Raina was at Darius's left elbow inside of 30 seconds. She did not look at Corvin. She looked at her own phone. Then she looked at Darius. She showed him the screen. She had been watching Corvin from across the room. She had photographed the moment he typed. The screenshot showed the timestamp, showed the direction of send, didn't show the contents. She didn't have that. Not yet, but she had enough to know that Corvin Bale had, within 4 minutes of learning the number on that contract, contacted someone. And the someone he would contact in that moment, in this room, at this time with this new information, was not a friend. Was not a business associate calling to congratulate anyone on anything. Darius looked at the screen for exactly 3 seconds, handed the phone back. Raina pocketed it. Neither of them said a word out loud. Because they didn't need to. Because some things communicate perfectly fine without sound. Because 20 years of watching how the world actually operates will teach you how to have a full conversation in a glance if you pay attention. And Darius Cole had always paid attention. Simone was talking again. He could hear at the edge of his awareness, doing the work of performing recovery for the classmates who were still watching, saying something about catching up, about maybe all getting together sometime, about how wonderful it was that things had worked out so well for everyone. Nobody was really listening. The cluster had thinned. 3 of the classmates who had been laughing the loudest 20 minutes ago were now suddenly fascinated by the dessert table on the other side of the room. Another one was checking his phone with the focus of a man who had received 17 urgent texts in the last 40 seconds, which he had not. Faye Odom materialized at Darius's right side sometime in the middle of all of this. He hadn't seen her come over. She was just there, the way she sat's always been, just there when things got complicated. Arms crossed. Watching Simone with the expression of someone who predicted rain 3 days ago and is now watching it happen. She said nothing for a full minute, then, low, just for him. I told you the door might come off the hinges. He almost smiled. Almost. Then Raina Holloway did the thing she had been waiting to do since she walked into that ballroom 3 hours ago. She unfolded her arms. She straightened up. And she walked into the middle of the circle with the calm, deliberate stride of a woman who has spent 15 years in compliance work, and that the difference between what is true and what people believe to be true is almost always a matter of who says it first and how loud they say it. She stopped in the center of the space, looked around at what remained of the cluster. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room had already gotten quiet in the way rooms do when they can feel that something is actually about to happen, and not just the performance of something. Most of you, she said, have been to the alumni dinner at least once in the 6 years. You've seen the scholarship recipients. You've clapped for those kids. People nodded. A few exchanged glances. Raina continued. For 6 years, every dollar in that endowment, every single scholarship, has been funded by one person, anonymous. No name on a plaque, no mention in the newsletter, no press release. She paused. I found out by accident last spring going through the fund's financial records for a compliance review. The room had gone still enough that Darius could hear the jazz trio from across the ballroom, something low and slow that hadn't changed tempo once all night. She turned and looked directly at Darius. It was him, she said. A ripple moved through the room, not loud, not dramatic. Just the sound of 20 or 30 people recalibrating something simultaneously. A murmur near the back, someone saying, "Wait, Darius, hold tight." And then another voice, quieter, saying, "Not one word." 6 years Darius stood, but still, he had not expected this. Or he had known abstractly that Raina knew. She'd told him so, months back when she first discovered it. But he had not expected her to say it here. In this room. Tonight. He felt something tighten in his chest and loosen at the same time. Not pride, exactly. More like exposure, like a window being opened in a room you'd gotten used to keeping closed. The air came in, and it was good air, and he hadn't realized until just this moment how much he had needed it. He thought about the first check, written at his kitchen table past midnight. Alone. He had told himself it didn't need his name attached to matter. He had believed that, still believed that. But hearing it said out loud in a room full of people who had known him when he was nobody special, before the company, before the contracts, before any of it, that was something different from what he had expected it to feel like. It felt like being seen in a way you didn't plan for and couldn't exactly defend against. Simone had gone very quiet. She was looking at him, not performing, not calculating, just looking. The way she hadn't looked at him in probably the last 6 years of their marriage. Like she was seeing something she'd missed before and was trying to figure out when exactly she'd stopped looking in that direction. He looked back at her, steady. Nothing sharp in it. Just plain she looked away. First, she turned, and she looked at Corvin. Something changed in Corvin's posture. Just slightly. A man whose internal systems have just registered a threat taking stock of his exits. He was still holding his drink. His hand had gotten tighter around the glass than it needed to be. 2 years ago, Raina said, a falsified subcontractor bid was submitted to a city project that Cole Infrastructure was managing. Shell paperwork, fake vendor accounts set up to route payments. The plan was to skim off the top before the discrepancy could be caught. She paused. Darius's team caught it in week 3. The paperwork was flagged, the submission was pulled, and the matter was handled without going public. Another pause. The paperwork traced back to a company that doesn't exist. But the company that doesn't exist has a registered agent. And that registered agent is a Railsbox store in Lincoln Park that also appears on 3 other documents connected to Corvin Bale's consulting practice. Nobody in the cluster was looking at their shoes or their phones anymore. Everyone was looking at Corvin. Corvin said, "That's an interesting interpretation of." Raina talked over him. Not loudly, just continuously. And tonight, she said, within 4 minutes of learning the value of the contract Darius just closed with the city, Mr. Bale sent a text message from this room. "I don't have the contents, but I have the timestamp and the recipient's number, which belongs to a registered subcontractor who submitted a materials bid on that same project last month." She let that land. The room did the math on its own. Simone had turned to look at Corvin. Her face was doing something complicated, multiple things at once. Disbelief to maintain itself against the weight of something she was realizing she had already known. "Corvin." Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "You told me that thing 2 years ago was a misunderstanding. You said don't," he said. Flat, immediate, not angry. Exactly. Just done. The way a man says don't when he means I am already calculating what this costs me and I need you to stop adding to the number. "You said it was nothing," Simone said. Corvin looked at her for just a moment, long enough to show her exactly how much weight he was giving this conversation. Then he looked away. That look, that single dismissive pivot, did more damage than anything Raina had said. Because Raina had given the room facts, but Corvin had just given Simone something she could never unhear. The specific quality of being looked at by someone who has already moved on from you in his mind while you're still standing right next to him. Simone recognized it. Of course she recognized it. She had given Darius that same look a dozen times. She said, louder now, the champagne flute trembling in her hand. You told me that condo was clean. You told me everything was above board. I told my mother. She stopped, steadied herself. I told everyone here tonight that you were that we. Corvin straightened his jacket. That sounds like a you problem, he said. He had called her by her full name. The name she never used. The name she'd stopped using when she was 19 because it felt too much like her grandmother's generation and not enough like the woman she was trying to become. Hearing it from him now, like that, in that tone, with that dismissal, it was the cruelest thing he could have chosen, whether he knew it or not. A woman near the punch table leaned over to her husband and whispered something. Not quietly enough. Something about always having wondered how Corvin afforded his place on nothing but consulting fees. The husband nodded. Word moves fast in a room that has already decided to stop being polite. Simone turned. Back to Darius. And the performance was gone now. All of it. The red dress and the box braids and the champagne flute and the 20-year armor of certainty, all of it sitting in a pile somewhere she couldn't reach anymore. Her voice cracked. You knew, she said. You knew about him. 2 years ago, and you never said anything to me. Darius looked at her. I handled it, he said. Without making a scene, her eyes filled. The flute trembled harder. A little champagne spilled over the rim onto her wrist, and she didn't seem to notice. Why, she said. Why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you? Nadine spoke. Not loud, not harsh, but clearly enough that everyone in earshot heard every word. Because, she said, there's something you should know, Simone. Darius knew about you and Corvin long before any of this. Years before the divorce was filed. The room went the kind of still where you can hear the ice shifting in someone's glass 3 feet away. Simone looked at Darius. Her mouth opened. Her face did something that couldn't be described as anything except breaking. Not dramatically, not the way people break in movies, but the way a person actually breaks, slowly, quietly, like something structural giving way after years of bearing weight it wasn't designed for. You knew, she said, this whole time. He nodded once. A hotel receipt, he said. In your blazer pocket, I found it when I was doing laundry. She closed her eyes. How long? She said. How long did you know? Over a year, he said. Before you asked for the divorce. She stood there with her eyes closed for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then she opened them. And she asked the question she'd probably been building toward for 8 years without knowing it. Then why? Her voice was raw now. Why did you stay? Why didn't you say anything? Why did you just keep showing up every day like... Because, Darius said. He said it quietly. Without anger. Without performance. The Wasan spaying seek when he has had 8 years to understand something completely and is now simply reporting what he knows. Because I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was patient enough, you'd eventually see what you had, and you'd choose to keep it. He paused. I was wrong about what love is supposed to cost a man. I thought staying silent was the same as staying committed. I was wrong about that too. He looked at her steadily. I stopped needing you to see it eventually, he said. And that's when things started to get better for me. Simone's worked. Nothing came out. She turned to Corvin one more time. Her voice had moved past tears into something rawer than that. You told me, she said. You told me you'd give me the life he never could. You said I'd never have to worry again about any of it. What happened to all of that? Corvin was looking at something past her left shoulder. Already gone in every sense that mattered. He said, I think you need to take a breath. You think I need to. Her voice cracked on the second word. I lied for you. I defended you. I told people in this room tonight that you were the better choice. She was shaking now. The champagne flute tilted, more spilled. I covered for you. And now you're standing here telling me to take a breath. Corvin turned and walked toward the bar. Just walked away. The cluster, what remained of it, made a collective sound. Not words. Just the group exhale of witnessing something they hadn't expected and weren't sure how to categorize. Someone older, near the edge of the rhythm, said, Lord have mercy. The quiet way. The way people say it who mean it as a literal prayer. Simone stood in the middle of the circle. Alone now, in the way that matters, which had nothing to do with the people still physically around her, and believing let go of in public, by someone you had chosen over someone who had not let go of you. She looked at Darius, and there was no performance left in her face at all, just a woman standing in the wreckage of a story she had been telling herself for a long time. Darius looked back at her. And what he felt in that moment, he would be honest about this later, alone on his back porch with a cold cup of coffee, was not triumph, was not satisfaction, not even the specific satisfaction of a long overdue justice. What he felt was something closer to grief, old grief, resolved a long time ago. But grief doesn't fully lose its shape just because you've made peace with it. He had loved her once. He had loved her for real and for a long time and with everything he had, and none of that had been wrong. The love had been real. What he had done with it, the silence, the staying, the belief that endurance was the same as commitment, those things had been wrong. But the love itself had been real. And standing here watching her face come apart, he did not feel glad about it. He did not feel vindicated. He felt mostly the particular sadness of watching someone finally arrive at the truth 20 minutes after the window closed. He turned to Nadine, and without a word passing between them, she took his hand, and he understood from the way she did it, not urgently, not in rescue, just present and steady, that she already understood what the moment had cost him and was not asking him to pretend otherwise. Some people, he had come to understand, love you in a way that makes room for your full history instead of requiring you to edit it down to something more convenient. That was the thing nobody in that ballroom understood about either of them. They started toward the door, Darius, her voice, behind him, smaller than he had ever heard it. He stopped, did not turn around. Not immediately, stopped and listened. Just wait, she said, please, just. He turned. She was standing where he'd left her. Champagne flute still in her hand. The circle completely gone now. Everyone had found somewhere else to be, quickly and thoroughly, the way people disperse when they realize they've been watching something private. She said, I didn't know. About him using me. I need you to know that I didn't know. He looked at her. He believed her. He had actually never doubted that. Corvin Bale was the kind of man who was very good at being believed. That was the whole mechanism. I know, Darius said. She swallowed. I'm sorry, she said. For tonight. And for. She stopped. Started again. For a lot of things. He nodded once. Not absolution, not reconciliation, not even full forgiveness in this moment. That was something he had done years ago. Alone and for himself, not for her. And it wasn't hers to receive as a gift in a ballroom. Just acknowledgement. That he had heard her. That he understood what it had cost her to say it. He turned back to the door. Nadine walked beside him, steady, unhurried. They passed the jazz trio still playing something slow and brassy near the elevators. Past the coat shacks, a young woman was reading something on her phone with subconscious of someone who had zero investment in whatever had just happened in the room behind her. They went through the lobby, past the fresh-cut flowers and the expensive coffee smell, past doorman who held the outer door and said, "Have a good evening," without looking up. Outside, October air, cold, clean. The rain had stopped somewhere in the last hour, and the pavement on Michigan Avenue was still wet, reflecting the streetlights in long wavering gold lines. A cab moved through it slowly. Someone a half-block south laughed at something, ordinary Chicago. Still going. Still completely unbothered. Darius stood on the sidewalk for a moment before moving toward the car. He breathed in the cold air. Let it out. Nadine stood beside him, not touching him, just present, the way she always was, giving him the space to be inside whatever the moment was instead of rushing him through it. He thought about Simone back in that ballroom, about Corvin walking away from her without looking back, about the specific cruelty of choosing someone for what they could do for you, and then abandoning them the moment the calculation changed. He thought about how Simone had done a version of that to him, not with the same intention, maybe not even consciously, and how understanding that didn't make what happened to her tonight any less painful to witness. People hurt other people for reasons that make complete sense inside a fear they've never examined. He had learned that slowly. He was still learning it. He opened the car door for Nadine. She got in. He walked around to the driver's side, settled in, both hands on the wheel. Neither of them spoke. He pulled out onto Michigan Avenue, heading north. The wet pavement ran under the tires. The storefront slid past, a bakery with its lights still on, a doorman under a canopy checking his phone, a woman in a long coat walking a dog that was taking its time about something. An ordinary Saturday night, ordinary city. He kept his eyes on the road. After 4 blocks, Nadine said, "You okay?" He thought about the question honestly, the way she had always required him to. "Getting there," he said. She nodded, put her hand lightly on his arm, not pressing, just there. He kept both hands on the wheel and drove north through the city and let the cold lake air come through the cracked window and thought about all the things that had been true tonight and all the things that had finally, in front of a room full of witnesses, stopped being secrets. The drive home was quiet, the good kind. The porch light was on when they pulled into the driveway. Nadine always left it on, not as a symbol, not as a statement. Just because she had grown up in a house where the porch light meant someone was expected home, and she had never stopped believing that was worth the electricity. Darius sat in the car for a moment after he cut the engine, both hands still on the wheel. Not because he needed to collect himself, just because the stillness felt like something worth staying inside a little longer before the night officially became history. The street was quiet. The house was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a dog registered a complaint with the darkness and then thought better of it. Ordinary Sunday morning eve on the Gold Coast. Entirely unbothered by what had happened 3 miles south, Nadine didn't rush him. She sat beside him and let the quiet be what it was. That was the thing about her. She understood the difference between a silence that needed filling and a silence that needed keeping. Most people got nervous in the gap and started talking. She just waited. Patient the way deep water is patient. Not still, just unbothered by the surface. He said, "I didn't expect Raina to say it, about the scholarship. In front of everyone like that." She said, "I know." He said, "I never told her she could." Nadine said she knew that. He thought about that. So why did she, he said. Because Nadine said some people spend years watching a good man get talked about like he's nothing. And they run out of patience before he does. He looked at the porch light, steady and warm against the dark. He said it felt strange, hearing it out loud in that room. She said, "Strange how?" "Like a window opening," he said. "In a room I'd gotten used to keeping closed." She looked at him. "Was it good air?" She said. He exhaled slow. He said, "It was good air." He got out, opened her door. They went inside through the back the way they always did. The house received them the way houses do at night when they know you well enough. Small sounds, the furnace cycling on somewhere below, the specific creak of the third stair that had been creaking since the first week, and that neither of them had ever gotten around to fixing, because by the second week it had already started to feel like punctuation. Nadine went to put the kettle on. Darius stood in the hallway for a moment without turning on the lights. Just stood there, letting the house settle around him and letting himself settle inside it. He thought about Simone in that circle, alone in the way that actually matters, which had nothing to do with the people still physically around her, and everything to do with the particular quality of being let go of in public, by someone you chose over someone who hadn't let go of you. He thought about Corvin walking away without looking back. He thought about being 23 in a small apartment in Bridgeport with a radiator that filed a noise complaint every night at 2 a.m, and a wife who had started looking at him like a problem she hadn't fully worked out yet. Then he turned on the kitchen light and went to sit at the oak table. They had bought it secondhand their first year together. A woman in Hyde Park who was last incising and couldn't take it with her. $60, and they'd carried it up 2 flights themselves. It had a water ring near the edge that Nadine always said gave it character. He had offered 3 times to refinish it. She had declined every time. Some things, she said, earn their marks. He sat at that table and let the night finish arriving. The kettle started its slow build toward a boil. Nadine moved around the kitchen the way she moved around everything, without wasted motion, without performance. 2 mugs, the tea above the stove, the small rituals that were not small at all. She set his mug down in front of him, sat across. He said, "I need to tell you something about the notebook." She folded her hands around her mug, listened. He said, "I started it because I needed to know if what I was experiencing was real. I'd write down what she said, specific words, specific dates, and then I'd read it back later with distance. To see if I was misreading her, if maybe I was being too sensitive." He looked at the water ring near the edge of the table. "I wasn't being too sensitive," he said. Nadine said nothing, just stayed present the way she knew how to stay. He said, "I kept it after the divorce because on the nights when I wanted to quit, on the company, on starting over, on any of it, I could open it and read a page and remember. This is what it cost to let someone else define you, never again." He looked up at her, "Not to use against her," he said, "just to make sure I never mistook her voice for my own again." Nadine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you still thought about that honestly? The way she always made room for him to." No, he said. I don't think I do anymore. She nodded.
Once.
Like that was the answer she had been waiting for him to find on his own, and she was glad he'd finally gotten there. They drank their tea. The kitchen lamp hummed low. Outside, the October wind had picked up off the lake and was moving through the trees a few blocks over toward Grant Park. The city on the other side of those trees was still going, still entirely unimpressed by what had unfolded in one of its ballrooms. That was one of the things he loved about Chicago. It did not hold still for your drama. It kept moving, and you either moved with it, or you stood the street getting rained on. He had spent enough standing in the rain. He pushed back from the table, went upstairs to the study. The notebook was where it had always been, bottom drawer. Under the old folders from the first 2 years of coal infrastructure. Under a warranty card for a coffee maker they no longer owned. Small black thing, drugstore. $2 if you caught it on a good day. He picked it up. Held it in both hands for a moment. Didn't open it. He didn't need to open it. He knew what was inside, not word for word anymore, but the shape of it. The shape of who he had been when he needed to write things down just to believe his own experience. That man had needed this badly. He didn't judge him for it. But that man was also gone now, and carrying his tools around wasn't the same as honoring him. He walked it downstairs, set it in the recycling bin in the kitchen, straightened up. Nadine was watching him from the counter. Done, he said. Good, she said. He said, it didn't feel like anything. She said, that's how you know it was actually time. He almost smiled. He almost said something. But the moment didn't need words, and he had learned a long time ago not to put words in a moment that was already complete. He poured himself a glass of water and went back to the table, and they sat together in the kitchen until past midnight and let the evening wind all the way down. The call from David O.C. came Monday morning at 8:12. Darius was already up, already dressed. He had driven to the office earlier than usual, not because anything was urgent, not yet, but because he had always done his thinking at his desk before the rest of the building woke up. Coffee going. City still gray outside the 14th floor windows. Lake Michigan somewhere past the buildings doing what it always did. David said, we have a development. Darius said, tell me. Corvin Bale made contact Saturday night with a materials supplier on the Phase 2 drainage work. After the reunion, David's voice was measured and precise the way it always was when he was delivering information that had legal weight. The contact was a direct offer. Cash paid outside the contract in exchange for falsifying the materials certification on the Phase 2 drainage work. Darius set his coffee down. The supplier, David said, had been approached once before, informally 2 months ago. He suspected something was coming and he was prepared. He recorded Saturday night's call in full. This morning he filed a report with the city's Office of Inspector General and sent a copy of the recording to our office simultaneously. When did you get it? Darius said. 7:15, David said. I've been reviewing it since then. A pause. There's one more thing, David said. Darius waited. Simone's name appears as a signatory on a capital allocation document Bale used to secure operating funds for his consulting practice. She signed it approximately 14 months ago. Based on the language of the document, it's unlikely she understood what she was signing or what the funds were for. Darius looked at the window. At the gray lake light. She didn't know, he said. I believe that, David said, but if the OIG expands the inquiry to include Bale's full potential structure, which they likely will, her name will appear in the documentation. The question is whether she appears as a cooperative witness or as a name that surfaces later without context. Darius said, what's the window? David said, if we file our supporting documentation today, which we need to do regardless, to fully protect the company, her name becomes part of the record by end of. If her representation contacts the OIG before that, she controls her. Turning, Darius said, give them until tomorrow morning. David said, that's what I thought you'd say. Darius said, file everything on our end. Full transparency, nothing held back. David said, I'll have the package ready by noon. Darius said, good. He hung up, sat for a moment. The office was still quiet. Just the low sound of the building's ventilation and the coffee cooling in the mug in the city outside getting on with its Monday. He thought about Simone signing a document she didn't understand because she trusted a man who was counting on her to trust him. I thought about the version of Corvin Bale who had identified a woman who was well-connected and well-liked and had just come out of a marriage, feeling like she needed to prove something. and had positioned himself precisely at the intersection of those two facts. Corvin hadn't chosen Simone despite her vulnerability. He had chosen her because of it. That was a specific kind of cold, the kind that never answered itself. Darius did not feel such as about what he was doing for her. He felt clear about it. There is a difference. Righteousness needs an audience. Clarity just needs to be acted on. He picked up his coffee, still warm enough. He got back to work. Faye Odom arrived at his office at 11 without an appointment, which was standard practice for Faye, who believed that calling ahead gave people time to arrange a version of themselves, and she was not in the business of versions. She came through the door, nodded at Petra, set a paper bag from the deli on the edge of Darius's desk, and sat down in the chair across from him like she owned it, which in a certain unofficial sense she always had. He looked at the bag, turkey on rye. He could tell from the shape of it. He said, "You could have called." She said, "You would have said you were fine." He said, "I am fine," she said. "I know. That's what sort of call. When you're not fine, you actually say so. When you're fine, you say it like it's a performance." He looked at her. "Fair," he said. She unpacked the food with the efficiency of someone who had been feeding people through difficult moments for 20 years, set his sandwich in front of him, kept hers. Then she looked at him straight. "I owe you an explanation," she said. He said, "The envelope." She nodded. He said, "I figured it was you sometime around the drive home Saturday night." She said, "Not sooner?" He said, "I had other things on my mind." She almost smiled. Then she set her sandwich down and got serious in the way Faye sayotjatsis, not heavily, not with ceremony, just a gear shift you could feel. "I found out about Corvin 4 months ago," she said. "Someone in the contracting office who tracks vendor activity flagged his name to me. Informally, off the record." She paused. "I didn't have the full picture. I had enough to know the direction it was going, and enough to know that if you didn't walk back into that situation on your own terms, he was going to force it open on his." Darius said. "You could have told me directly," she said. "I tried. August, dinner at Virtue. You changed the subject twice." He thought back to August. He remembered the dinner. He also remembered the subject change. He had not at the time fully registered what he was doing or why. She said, "I know you, Darius. If I'd handed it to you directly, you would have managed it. Legally, professionally, perfectly." She met his eyes. "But you wouldn't have gone to that reunion. You would have handled the business and left the door still cracked open. And that was the thing I couldn't fix for you." He was quiet for a moment. "So you put the invitation in my hand and let me decide," he said. She said, "I needed you to go because you were ready. Not because I dragged you there. There's a difference," "What's the difference?" She said, "If I pull you there, you spend the whole night braced for something, waiting for the floor to shift. But if you walk in because you've decided," she shrugged, "you walk out finished." He sat with that. "Did it work?" she said. He said, "Yeah, it worked." She picked up her sandwich. "Good," she said. "Now eat. You've got a legal filing due by noon and you haven't touched your food." He had not touched his food. He picked up the sandwich. They ate at his desk in the quiet of a Monday morning office and talked about nothing urgent for 40 minutes, which was its own kind of necessary. Some conversations don't have a subject. They're just presence. The fact of someone sitting across from you who knows the whole story and isn't going anywhere. Faye Odom had been that person for 22 years. He did not say thank you. She would not have wanted him to. She would have waved it off with the specific impatience she reserved for sentiment she considered unnecessary. So he just ate the sandwich and let her talk about a client who had called her at 11 on a Friday night to ask whether she thought the current rate environment was affecting his decision-making capacity. He laughed, a real one, the kind that comes up without warning and doesn't ask permission. She looked pleased. "Good," she said. There it is, he said. The call from Simone came at 4:17 that afternoon. He was back at his desk. The legal package had gone out at noon. It's a planned, clean, complete, nothing withheld. David had confirmed receipt from the OIG's intake office. Everything was emotion. Everything was, as David had put it, with the quiet satisfaction of a careful man whose careful work was paying off, exactly where it needed to be. His phone lit up on the desk, Simone. He looked at it for 2 full rings, not deciding whether to answer, just giving himself a break. He picked up. She said, "Hi." He said, "Hi," a beat. She said, "My attorney got a call from David Ossie's office this morning." He said, "I know." She said, "You gave us a window." He said, "Yes." A pause. She said, "You didn't have to do that." He said, I know. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear something in the background on her end. A television, maybe? Or traffic through an open window. The ordinary sounds of a life that was in the middle of being reconsidered. She said, "Why did you?" He said, "Because you didn't know what you were signing." She said, "That's the only reason?" He thought about that. He thought about what it would mean to give her a harder answer, and whether the harder answer would help either of them. He said, "Because it was the right thing to do, and because it's who I am. Those are the only two reasons." She exhaled. Long and slow, she said, "I've been going over things since Saturday night. Things I said to you, things I didn't say." He waited. She said, "I didn't know about the scholarship. 6 years and I never knew." He said, "I know." She said, 6 years of those kids getting to go to school because of you, and you never said a word to anyone." He said, "That wasn't the point of it." She said, "I know. That's what I keep coming back to." She paused. "That was always who you were. I couldn't see it when I was looking at you from close up." "I don't know what that says about me," he said. "It says you were afraid of something, and you made choices from inside that fear. That's not unique to you." She said, "You're being generous." He said, "I'm being accurate." Another silence, this one softer than the others. She said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Go ahead." She said, "Did you ever hate me?" After everything. He thought about that with the seriousness it deserved. Not the easy answer, the honest one. "No," he said. "I was angry for a while, genuinely angry. But that passed. Anger needs fuel, and I stopped feeding it." She said, "What did you feel after the anger?" He said, "Mostly sad. For a while, and then mostly nothing. And then I started building something to something that actually needed my attention, and the nothing got crowded out." She said, "And now?" He said, "Now I feel like a man who closed a door properly on Saturday night and is standing on the right side of it." She was quiet. Then she said, "I made a mistake with Corvin. I knew it earlier than I admitted to myself. But I'd already said too many things to too many people about how right it was. And once you've done that, it becomes very hard to turn around, because turning around means all those people are watching you be wrong," he said. "I know how that works." She said, "I used to think that was your problem." She paused. "That you cared too much what people thought." He said nothing. She said, "I think I had it exactly backwards." He let that sit. She said, "I'm sorry, Darius, for Saturday night, and for a lot of things that came before it, things I did, things I said, things I never once said that I should have." He did not rush his answer. He let the apology land and sit and mean what it meant. He said, "I hear you and I believe you." He said, "That's what I have. That's the honest thing." She exhaled. "Okay," she said. A long pause, the kind that means something is finishing. She said, "Is she good to you, Nadine?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Good." She sounded like she meant it. Not as a performance, not as a parting grace note, just as a fact she had arrived at and was naming. "Good. You deserved that," he said. "Take care of yourself, Simone. Work with your attorney. Be straight with the OIG. That's the way through this." She said, "I know." He said, "You'll be okay." She said, "You don't know that." He said, "No. But I'm saying it because I believe it, and because you need to hear someone say it who doesn't have a reason to." A silence, the last one. She said, "Thank you." "For the wind," he said. "Take." He hung up, sat at his desk for a moment. The city out the window, going about its Monday evening business. The lake doing what it always did. The office quiet now, most of his team gone for the day. He thought about a man standing in a parking car garage at 11 at night, wondering when exactly he had stopped believing he was worth much of anything. He thought about a hotel receipt folded in a jacket pocket. About a notebook started not in anger but in the genuine need to know if what he was experiencing was real. He thought about 5 years of building something from zero. About the first contract, the drainage work on the west side. About 40 people who now had jobs because he had shown up every day whether anyone was watching or not. He thought about a scholarship fund that had been quietly sending kids to school for 6 years and that he had never once needed to put his name on. He thought about a woman in a midnight blue dress walking into a ballroom like she had somewhere better to be and choosing that room instead. And he thought about Simone's question. Did he ever hate her? No, he hadn't. He had loved her for real, and that love had cost him real things, and the cost had been worth it, because it had made him into the kind of man who knew now precisely what he was worth and didn't need anyone else's accounting to confirm it. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, most of everything. He shut down his computer, put on his jacket, took the elevator down to the lobby, and walked out into a Monday evening in October on the South Loop. Cold. Clean. The wind off the lake doing what October wind does, reminding you that something is ending and something else is on its way, and that both of those things are fine. He drove home. Nadine was in the kitchen when he came through the back door. The good cardigan, the coffee-colored slippers. Hair wrapped in the silk scarf she wore in the evenings. She was reading something at the table and she looked up when he came in and said, "How'd it go?" He said, "Good." David filed everything. Simone called. She said, "How was that?" He considered. He said, "Necessary. I think for both of us." She nodded, set her reading down. She said, "Are you hungry?" He said, "Yeah." She said, "Good. I made that soup you like." "The one with he said, "The one that takes 4 hours." She said, "It only takes 3. He said, "You started it this afternoon." She said, "I started this afternoon." He stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and looked at this woman who had made a 3-hour soup on a Monday, because she had known, without being told, that this particular Monday would need it. He said, "I don't know how I found you." She said, "You were stacking chairs." He said, "You always say that." She said, "It's always true." He sat down at the table, the one with the water ring near the edge, the one that had been earned. She set a bowl in front of him and sat across and picked up her reading again, and the kitchen filled with the smell of something warm and the sound of the wind outside and the low creak of the house doing what old houses do in October. He ate. She read. Neither of them needed it to be anything more than that. Some things do not require ceremony. Some things do not require an audience or a resolution or a moment where someone says something perfect and the music swells. Some things are just a bowl of soup and a kitchen lamp and a woman across the table who knows your full story and chose you anyway and keeps choosing you on ordinary Mondays when there's nothing to prove and nowhere to be. That was the win. Not the contract, not the ballroom, not watching Simone's face change when she finally understood what she had left. This right here, this quiet table. Darius Cole had spent 20 years learning that the things worth building never announce themselves. They didn't come with applause or with the right lighting or with an audience of people who used to doubt you finally having to admit they were wrong. They came like this. At the end of a long Monday, with soup going cold at the edges because you'd been sitting with it too long without eating. With the October wind outside doing its business. With someone across from you understood that home is not a place you arrive at. It's a thing you build, one ordinary evening at a time, until one day you look up and realize you're already inside it. And it's enough. It's exactly enough.